And now I come to the book of Ruth. Now, I know I just got done yesterday posting my discussion on the book of Judges, but the book of Ruth is very short. It's just a couple pages. One, two, three, four, and then just the tiniest bit here on page 5 in my edition. So you can easily read it in 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know how long this took me. I wasn't timing myself. So I just knocked this off in one sitting, and might as well just do a review of this. Again, sorry for posting a lot of videos. As I'm sure you know, some of the books of the Bible are longer and some of them are shorter. And when I get to the shorter books of the Bible, those will be a bunch of quick videos. So, with such a short book, I'll try to keep my comments brief. And I know I do tend to go on and on about this. But Ruth is yet another story I remember well from Sunday school. I was never overly interested in it. My mother really liked the story of Ruth. My sister was interested in the story of Ruth. I think some of my Sunday school teachers really liked the story. I always found it a bit boring, and I think not to be stereotypical, but I think maybe this is just another kind of boy versus girl dynamic, right? The boys like stories about Samson and killing the Philistines and David and Goliath and all the violent stories about the Old Testament. But the this is one of the less violent stories of the Old Testament and kind of a romance story. So maybe the ideal audience for this is not young boys. I did, however, become much more interested in the book of Ruth after listening to Christine Hayes explain the themes of it and its kind of historical place. And with apologies, my own analysis is going to be largely taken from Christine Hayes. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to say anything that she didn't already say, but since her explanation of this made an impression on me, I'll just repeat what I found to be interesting from her. And I did also read the Wikipedia page for this, which was largely the same as what Christine Hayes said in her lectures. Um, yeah, actually, maybe before I get into that, one other note here. Uh, in the Christian Bible, Ruth is put between Judges and Samuel, but that's not the way it is in the Jewish Bible. In the Jewish Bible, Ruth is in the third section, and the narrative goes right from Judges into Samuel, which to a certain extent makes makes it a bit smoother. Because we're talking about the historical narrative of the nation of Israel, and that continues from Judges to Samuel, and it might read a little bit smoother if you took out the book of Ruth. It's the Christians who have moved the book of Ruth from the third section and placed it into the historical narrative. And though it's not a narrative of the nation, it is a narrative, and it takes place in the days of Judges. So I can see why it makes sense to move it up here. But it is notable that the character of Ruth never gets referred, or Boaz, or any of these characters never gets referred back to again once we jump back into the broader historical narrative. And we'll come back to that point maybe when we talk about the ending of Ruth. Christine Hayes and Wikipedia say that Ruth was written in the post Persian period, or the return from the Persian exile period, and say this was a response to the racial purity movement that is evident in Ezra and Nehemiah. So Ezra and Nehemiah, written in the post-exilic period, the return period. Let me put my bookmark in here. Take a extreme view against intermarriage with foreign women, Moab in particular. So the prohibition against marrying Moabite women was originally in Deuteronomy, and then Ezra and Nehemiah are trying to enforce that prohibition. So this is from Nehemiah 13, for example. At that time, I saw Jews who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. As regards their children, half of them spoke the language of Ashdod or the language of one of the other peoples, but could not speak the language of Judah. I reprimanded them and called down curses on them. I struck several of them and tore out their hair and made them swear by God, "You shall not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters either for your sons or yourself." Yeah. Among all the nations, talk about Solomon. Foreign women were the cause of sin. Must we hear it said that you too are committing this grave crime, playing traitor to our God by marrying foreign women? And that the Ezra, who was also of the same period, in Ezra 9, the men who married foreign women, when Ezra hears that they've married the foreign women, where is it? The people of Israel and the priests of the Levites, they have found wives among these foreign women for themselves, the Moabites mentioned here, and for their sons. The holy race has been mingling with the natives of the countries. So in this act of treachery, the chief men and the officials have led the way. At this news, I tore my garments and my cloak. I tore the hair from my head and my beard and sat down quite overcome. And then continues throughout the rest of this chapter. Here's the list of the guilty people who have married foreign women, and they're instructed to put their wives away. Proclamation was issued in Judah and Jerusalem to all the exiles that they were to assemble in Jerusalem. Ezra the priest stood up and spoke, "You have committed treason by marrying foreign women. You have added to the sins of Israel." All those in town who have foreign wives could come at the stated time, accompanied by elders and judges from each town, until we have turned God's anger away. All those passages very strongly condemning the marriage of foreign women, and the Moabites come in especially. So Christine Hayes and Wikipedia date the writing of Ruth to this period, and show that, okay, there was one view in Ezra and Nehemiah against the mingling of the races, but there was another view that was also at that time that it was okay to marry somebody from a foreign country, and the person who had that view wrote the book of Ruth. So with that in mind, Ruth actually takes up on a lot more of a political and progressive meaning than I realized when I was in Sunday school. This is a direct rebuttal to other parts of the Bible where they're saying you cannot marry foreigners. And as I suspect you noticed in those parts in Ezra and Nehemiah that I read out just now, where it's talking about how we must not intermingle the holy race with these foreigners. After some of the ideologies of the 20th century, those sections of the Bible strike a chilling chord now when you read them. So it's disturbing to read those sections of Ezra and Nehemiah, but then it's interesting to come back to the book of Ruth and see that not everyone held these kind of extreme views. And I think Christine Hayes talks about in her lectures that the different traditions or different points of view that are in dialogue with each other inside the same Bible, which makes it an interesting book to read. And as Christine Hayes points out in her lectures, the author of this book goes out of his way, his or her way, to keep referring to Ruth as the Moabite. And the translation here in the Jerusalem Bible is the Moabitess. But I think in the NIV it was Ruth the Moabite. But yeah, it keeps mentioning her not just as Ruth, but as Ruth the Moabite, referred to over and over again. So making the point very clearly. And then at the end, we get to the punchline, where Ruth is actually the ancestor of David. So Ruth's son was Obed, Obed's son was Jesse, and Jesse's son was David. So Ruth is the great grandmother of David. So not only is it permissible to marry a Moabite woman, but a Moabite woman is actually the direct ancestor of the Davidic line. Christine Hayes points out that this does not come till the very end. This is the punchline here at the very bottom. And then there's another little section here, but the Jerusalem Bible says that this genealogy cannot be the work of the same author because it's talking about the descendants of Perez, but the whole point of the story of Ruth is that Elimelech's name is perpetuated. But either way, both of these genealogies, the one in verse 17 and then apparently the one added later in these verses, emphasize that at the very end of the story that Ruth is the ancestor of David. So hiding the punchline until the end. And then once Christine Hayes mentioned that, I realized something that I had never realized before, which is once we get done with this story and then back to the historical chronicle, Ruth is never mentioned again. So when we get into 1 Samuel and when we meet Jesse and David's family, they never say this was the son of Boaz and Ruth. The characters of Boaz and Ruth are never mentioned here again, which again is, Christine Hayes didn't say this in her lectures, but it just strikes me as more evidence that this is coming from a later period and is retroactively establishing the lineage of David with the Moabite women. So with that in mind, this short little section becomes much more interesting, and it becomes not just a little romance story, but an interesting counter view to the idea that the races should not mix. There are other little interesting things here that I picked up from Christine Hayes' lecture. Christine Hayes says that the names of the characters, so Milan and Chilion, the two sons of Elimelech and Naomi, in Hebrew, apparently their names mean pining away and sickness and death. So Christine Hayes says it's like they come onto the stage and they announce, okay, I'm going to be dying soon. The Jerusalem Bible, the footnotes here backs up. The names may be fictitious and chosen for their meaning. Milan is sickness, Chilion pining away, Oprah, she who turns away, Ruth the beloved, etc. Oh, speaking of Oprah, this is something I learned just on Wikipedia, and I bring this up just as an indication of all the little rabbit holes you can go on Wikipedia if you wanted to. Um, According to rabbinic tradition, Oprah is viewed very negatively because she's the one who turns away from Naomi, where Ruth stays with Naomi. And apparently, there's a tradition that one of David's generals, Abishai, kills Oprah with her own spindle later in one of the excursions into the Moabite territory. Um, Now that's not in the Christian Bible. That's just later Jewish tradition. But I don't know. I always find it interesting the little rabbit holes you can go through on Wikipedia with all these biblical characters. So there's another one for you. Um, yeah. Well, I'm mentioning random facts I got from Wikipedia and Christian Hayes lectures. Both Wikipedia and Christian Hayes mention that when Ruth sleeps next to Boaz and uncovers his feet during the middle of the night, where is that? Turn back the covering of his feet. Apparently, that is possibly a euphemism for uncovering his genitals. Yeah, maybe a euphemism for some sort of sexual act, or not. I mean, like I've been saying in all these reviews, nobody really knows. There's a lot of stuff that's open to interpretation or debate, but yeah. Other than that, I don't think I have too much to add to just the normal story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. A very short little story, which I was never very much interested in as a kid, but then learning about the historical background to this made me much more interested in it. And I will finish here.